Hello, and welcome to our lesson on crisis management. This segment will cover crisis management phases. Crisis management was divided into 7 distinct phases that must be managed effectively for the crisis management process to be successful. Detection, diagnosis, decision-making, implementation, feedback, recovery, and learning. The ability to react swiftly to any crisis depends on its early detection, and this is achieved by monitoring potential risks to gather intelligence. Risk is exposure to the possibility of financial loss or gain, physical injury, damage, or delay as a consequence of the uncertainty associated with pursuing a particular course of action. An uncertain event only becomes a risk for an organization when it has accepted the resourcing responsibility for loss or gain as a consequence of its occurrence. All risks exist either outside or inside an organization. This means that to be fully efficient, an organization needs both external and internal monitors. External risk. Those who have external monitoring responsibilities for client risks should operate at the project boundary and scan the project environment for potential problems. To completely cover project risks, external monitors should have remote, relevant, long-term, and short-term dimensions to their activities. Internal risk. In contrast to external risks, internal risks tend to be more relevant, short-term, and largely the result of the industry's organizational, contractual, and employment practices, manifesting themselves in the form of poor project performance. Monitoring problems. Potential problems must be detected and communicated rapidly. If a potential crisis is not detected, it cannot be managed, and managers must understand the reasons why this can happen. The reason why organizations suffer a crisis is that no one realizes the organization is vulnerable to it due to possible internal conflicts between different departments, unclear lines of responsibility, and accountability for the reporting of potentially damaging events, people working under time pressures, performance feedback often being deficient, risk management techniques being ignored, and some project stakeholders being excluded from important phases of the project. Competition between project goals. In addition to the problem of poorly focused monitoring, there are substantial difficulties that can arise from competition among interdependent parts of an organization's control system and lack of communication. For example, the team responsible for the supply of time and cost information realizes that solving a cost problem would create a time problem and vice versa. As a consequence, problems detected in one system are not communicated to the other, a deficiency that prevents a balanced and comprehensive crisis response. One way of overcoming this problem is to share project risks, equal distribution of shared responsibility for budget and time overruns, and rapid feedback. Changing project teams. Project managers face special problems in monitoring project risks because of their reliance upon the diligence of project teams, which are constantly changing. The dangers of changing team members within and between projects present an elevated risk, as it can lead to accidents and potential crisis. Lack of loyalty. A further problem for project managers is the varied and often conflicting interests that characterize projects. The teams charged with monitoring client risks may not always have a client's interests in mind. To overcome this problem, contracts normally require project participants to monitor a range of specified client risks and react in a prescribed manner if they arise and required to warn of potential problems in a timely manner in order to receive the right to payment for extra work. Cost and time pressures. It may be economically irrational or indeed impossible, due to limited resources, to monitor every potential risk an organization faces. For this reason, people tend to choose between the costs and benefits of doing so. The tension between diligence and costs burdens a project manager with heavy moral and economic dilemmas in establishing acceptable parameters for compromise. The moral dimension is particularly acute when considering safety issues because a price has to be placed on a person's health. Superiority. A sense of organizational exclusivity can lead to a sense of superiority over non-members and project teams neglecting risk information coming from outside sources, and having an attitude that those in the organization knew better than outsiders about the hazards of the situation with which they were dealing. In large projects, with annual turnovers that exceed many companies, defensiveness to outsiders can be a particular problem. The pressures, cohesion, loyalties, focus, and momentum that can develop on such projects can become so intense that they effectively seal themselves off from the outside world, considering outsiders as an unnecessary distraction and even covering up problems that may expose internal weaknesses to them. The occasional involvement of outsiders who are unfamiliar with a project is often the most effective means of detecting potential problems, and their exclusion only increases a project's crisis proneness. Shut down. During a crisis, people tend to shut down all senses apart from the one that is most needed to survive under the circumstances. During a crisis, some monitoring systems may be shut down, leaving the organization vulnerable to further crises. This means that problems can arise because of crises elsewhere in an organization, and one of the challenges of crisis management is to prevent tunnel vision by maintaining vigilance in the early warning stages. Invincibility. A history of successes tends to induce a sense of invincibility between the project members and an attitude of, "It can't happen to us," that blinds the potential problems. Also, the growth that often accompanies success tends to confuse monitoring responsibilities and spurn bureaucratic systems that are slow to respond to potential problems that are detected, and the can-do culture downplays the early warning signals of crisis. After detecting a potential problem, an organization should investigate it further to arrive at a diagnosis that will indicate an appropriate response. The person responsible for this function is called the comparator, and since the role demands specialist knowledge, such people should be professionally qualified specialists such as structural engineers, architects, quantity surveyors, cost engineers, or site managers. Diagnostic problems. The diagnostic process is essentially one of data collection, and any problems encountered in the monitoring phase also affect the diagnosis process. However, some special problems are peculiar to the process of diagnosis, such as unclear goals and defensive routines. Unclear goals. To make judgments about the potential impact of a problem on project goals, comparators must have a clear idea of the standard of performance required in their particular specialist area of expertise. Defensive routines. Problems can arise in the diagnosis process because of defensive routines, a behavior designed to prevent individuals and organizations from experiencing embarrassment or loss. This is particularly likely during a crisis because of the severity of potential ramifications, and is even more certain if there is an element of personal blame associated with it. Typical defensive behavior involves bypassing problems or covering them up by crafting messages that contain inconsistencies and discourage debate. This is the end of this segment of our lesson. In the next segment, we will continue discussing crisis management phases. This course is presented to you by South Europe College. Thank you for listening, and see you on our next segment.